Hi guys, this is Dr. Scott, and today we're going to get in with Patriot Underground, and we're going to talk a lot about it, but I want to kind of give you a little background information here, and you can kind of click on this to kind of look at where his channel is. So he's on Rumble, has around 74K. When I first saw him, he had about, I want to say 45, 50K kind of thing in that range. And, I'd seen him and I was like, who is this guy? Like, what is he talking about? And I'd heard about him and I was like, yeah, he's got really like a broad information. I wouldn't say, I always kind of, quantify people as more like newscaster types that kind of just keep, in the overall information. And I think that there's content providers. And I kind of think, Patriot Underground kind of leans way more in this kind of category because he's really looking at the logic behind it, and that's what I loved about him with that too. So how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I really do appreciate you inviting me on. I know that you and I go back a long ways. As a matter of fact, I do believe that first time that I interviewed you, I still had my camera off. So that's kind of
right.
An interesting barometer for me because it seems like forever since I was still covering up my face and all that sort of thing. So, and as a matter of fact, you were, I don't know if you remember this, but you were the first interview that I did when I turned my camera on.
Yeah, I do remember that. And I mean, I think, and people wonder about that all the time, but basically listen, there are situations that people are going through in their life, and it could be either dangerous or difficult for them to, keep on going if they were known. And so it's not like, people are trying to like hide for the heck of it because they're worried about what they're saying. It's more about, family, jobs, whatever that might be. And so like I have Roger, a lawyer, and he'll only talk to me and he has his face covered up, and there's a reason for that kind of stuff too. So that's why that happens that way with that too. So, what I want to kind of do a little bit here is jump into some of these conversations that we hear all the time, and we'll kind of bring this first thing up on the stage so people can kind of think about it. But, can you talk a little bit about, this particular post that is one of the very first posts out there that you've seen?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the most famous Q drops of all, and I think for good reason, because it's the only one that mentions the emergency broadcast. And this has been something that has been, I think, a fundamental pillar of most people's understanding of the entire Q operation, that eventually we were going to get to a point, and certainly we can talk a lot about that today, but there was going to come a time when the White Hats were going to be, as it says in the drop, initiating the EBS in order to basically carry out these mass arrests. And that was our understanding, I think, right from the beginning, that this is a fundamental pillar of the end game, what the end game is going to look like. And as time has gone on, we've had kind of a shifting perspective on a lot of the Q drops, particularly with regard to the EBS, because as you know, it was kind of, I guess, widely expected that during the pause, the 4-year period where we were under the presidency, quote unquote, of fake Biden,
right,
that the EBS, the scare event, and this whole climactic scenario was going to play out while he was still in office. And we all had good reasons for believing that. And I do believe that at this stage of the game, a lot of people are kind of going through a recalibration or an adjustment, because we saw Trump come into office, and that obviously did not happen during the 4 years that fake Biden was there. I actually thought that there was a possibility during the lame duck period that we would see the EBS or World War III scare event, all of these things. So for me personally, Dr. Scott, I definitely had that expectation. And I think that I'm not alone on that. And many individuals out there, I'm sure probably most of your audience, could identify with that. And so here we are, it's March 8th of 2025. We've seen some amazing things happen so far, but we haven't gotten to that critical moment, that precipice yet. And I still very much believe that we are going to be looking at an EBS situation. And
So
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean, kind of leads right into this. If most of us thought the EBS would happen by now, which you and me both, kind of thing, what are we waiting for?
Well, that's like the $1 trillion question right there. What are we waiting for? Well,
yeah, I don't want anyone to say like, we're going to talk about this date. No, we don't believe that way. So,
well, right. I mean, dates, we learned a long time ago. Anybody who's been reading the Q drops and following them, et cetera, a long time ago, we started to realize that the dates on the posts were not actually dates in the sense of like, this is going to happen at this specific moment. And the original Anons, when the Q movement really started, that was the understanding. So there was kind of the way I look at it, it was sort of this built-in aspect of the Q operation where they wanted to conceal, they wanted to give us a foundation to understand. First of all, I actually talked about this on a show that I did not too long ago. I called it the 3 pillars of Q.
Okay.
And so the first pillar would be giving us that foundation. Like they started a grassroots movement. Now, obviously, there were many, many people who were awake before the Q operation as we know it actually started, including myself. I actually started to wake up around, it was like 2012, 2013 for me. And there have obviously been people who have been for 30 years or so been tuned into all this stuff. But what Q did was it gave us an understanding and started this grassroots movement in terms of exposing the cabal. And the second pillar, the way that I look at it, is they gave us a glimpse into the future in terms of what the end game is going to look like. But in between, there's a whole bunch of, I don't want to call it disinformation, but information that is completely camouflaging the actual battle plan. In other words, if you're the White Hats and you know that you're starting this grassroots movement, you're educating the public about the cabal, and you're giving us a sense of where this whole operation is going, but at the same time, you don't want to reveal the battle plan. You don't want to put out too much information because obviously if we can figure it out, the enemy can figure it out. So right. They're never going to actually do that. So I think that's what they did is they gave us an understanding of the problem. They gave us an understanding of what the solution is going to look like, which I believe is completely relevant to the drop 34, which we just looked at. But in between, there's a whole bunch of, I guess you could say, indicators or comms that would lead us in a direction in terms of the narrative, in terms of what we're speculating about, that would kind of throw us off the scent because they didn't want to obviously reveal too much. And because of that, I think that it caused a lot of people to get very cynical. It caused
right.
a lot of people to start to question, well, are we just being played here? And that, of course, is getting amplified more and more and more, especially with the delay of the Epstein files. As you know, that's a big topic out there right now. And so I think that the Q team wanted to create this fog of war, but at the same time, remind us that they're there. That's what the comms are all about. The nods, the wink winks, as my good friend Mike King calls them, those are for us. But the movie aspect that's playing out, it's for the normies. And so right. I think that's really what we're looking at as far as the overall scope of the operation. That's the way I see it. So,
well, I mean, so like, let's go over to that one for a second, and we can jump, through other kind of hoops in a little bit. But sure. When people hear, it's just a movie, or this is a movie, or they have no clue how a frame of reference where to put that. What specifically would you say is the movie, and what's not, maybe?
Well, I think that the way that I have described it to my audience, this is my personal perspective, is that it is. I tend to lean in the direction of the White Hats being in full control.
Okay.
I tend to err on the side of that. But that's not to say that we're not actually experiencing some real threats, some real attacks and events. I've said right from the beginning that if you try to make the argument that everything that we're watching is scripted out and that nothing is real, you run out of real estate relatively quickly. So I view it kind of as a hybrid, that the White Hats, I do believe, are staging most of the events that we are witnessing.
So like the major kind of events that you see, maybe like for instance, Trump just did the speech in the House, and would that be one of the scripted events kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, and why would that be a scripted event? So people kind of see how you think on that.
Well, there are a number of different reasons. I think if you look at the length of the speech, it was an hour and 7 minutes long.
Okay.
A 17. Every time that Trump gets on stage, it always seems to be at 17 past the hour, and this was no exception. He got on stage at 9:17 exactly. The speech lasted an hour and 7 minutes. And then the Democratic rebuttal to that speech happened to be 17 minutes. Now, this has happened over and over and over and over again. And as I've said many times, and it's been certainly the perspective of a lot of individuals out there that I respect, you can, and Q, by the way, asked us several times, do you believe in coincidences? And how many coincidences before it's mathematically impossible? So you could write off something like that. In other words,
once in a while.
This has only happened once in a while. You could say, oh, geez, that really is a strange coincidence. But you kind of say, well, I don't know. To me, that seems like a coincidence. But when it happens over and over and over and over again, then you start to ask yourself, well, how is that even possible?
Right.
And so that, I think, is one aspect. But if you kind of look at the big picture of that speech, he gave it on the original inauguration day. We know that we're going back to, we're restoring our constitutional republic. And from that lens, you can really look at this whole speech that he gave as being part of this scripted movie, because it was intended, I do believe, to amplify the shifting perspective of the normies out there. And that's the way I view the entire purpose of the Great Awakening. I mean, there's obviously it's multi-layered, but given where we're at right now, and in my perspective, the White Hats really being in control, and there's so many different things that will evidence that. The primary purpose of what we're going through right now is to wake up as many people as we can before we actually get to the EBS, before we get to the climax of the movie. And that speech and all the shenanigans that went on fit right into that mold. And I talked about this on a recent show, but after the speech, CBS News, mainstream media, had to admit in their own poll that 76% of the people out there are in support of Trump. 80% of the people believe that staged Al Green
in a biased poll from CBS. So I mean, that's a biased group. You and I think about this all the time. I mean, it depends upon the audience, the target audience you're looking at. It's like if you're trying to ask about Satanism to a bunch of people who are atheists, well, then you're going to have a very low poll, low polling, because they wouldn't know anything about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And well, I would also add to that, in my opinion, and again, there's a lot of evidence to back this up, and I talk about it all the time. The mainstream media is actually the Q mainstream media. It's continuity of, I believe that the White Hats some time ago, I can't say specifically, nobody can, but I do believe that they took control of mainstream media, and that's part of the movie. Because when you think about it, all the normies out there, more and more, they're kind of moving away from mainstream media. And we've seen plenty of polls to suggest that. But thinking about it from the White Hat perspective and planning this whole thing out, mapping it all out, that you're trying to get the the individuals out there who are center left, somewhere in the middle, not the people that are the 4 to 6% that Q talked about that would be
Right.
lost forever, but the vast majority of individuals out there,
Right in the middle kind of thing, right?
right in the middle, they're still, at least to some degree, paying attention to mainstream media. So the best way to do that, the best way to wake people up, is to start injecting narratives and truth into the mainstream media, while at the same time maintaining the illusion that it's still the mainstream media that we've always known. So they'll put information out there, but then they'll seek to discredit it. And the genius of it is that I do believe is that the white hats are using this as a tool to put out truthful information to generate controversy in order to get more and more people to start paying attention and to wake people up, to get them to start thinking critically, while at the same time giving the mainstream media, and I do that in air quotes, enough rope to hang themselves.
Right.
So they're putting out the truth, or at least some aspects of it. They're generating the conversation, they're narrative seeding, but at the same time, they're seeking to debunk all of these things, which are clearly the truth. So what that does is it prompts people to do their own research. And that's why we're seeing such a migration away from mainstream media to alternative media. And I think that's been the plan all along. But when you look at their own polls, and the polls are just one aspect of it, I think you and I would both agree that we're seeing things brought up and discussed on CBS, MSNBC, CNN, the usual suspects that only a few short years ago would never, ever see the light of day. So they're putting all of this information out there. And getting back to the speech a little bit, that whole disruption by Al Green, which I think was just absolutely, so fake that it's laughable. 80% of the people on mainstream media in that same set of polls that they put out on CBS said that they thought that Al Green's disruption was completely inappropriate. And then it gets even more interesting. He was kicked out. He was kicked out of the speech at 9:22. And this is something that we've learned about, and I kind of referenced this a moment ago, that the dates and the timestamps in the Q drops are not meant to indicate when things are going to happen, but they're there to basically have future proof past, like the news unlocks the map. Al Green was kicked out at 9:22, the same timestamp as Q drop 284, which says, in quotes, "Fly Al fly."
Yeah, well, yeah, right. Which I thought was wild. I mean, I can't remember who found that one. I was like sitting there going,
I saw it on Joe Rambo's channel, but
yes.
I do believe it was an account on X that I actually hadn't heard of. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but
Joe showed it. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's, I want to step back to this. I want to show you guys something fascinating when you realize what he was saying here a second ago. So this is CNN, funniest thing in the world. How many subscribers they have? 17 million. 170,000 videos. Now, and here's something that's weird. So we're just showing you like Al Green. He's got 33,000 views, 21,000. Now they boosted up to 48K, 91, right? So some of them get some bigger ones. If they mention Trump, they're going to get big views, right? So this happens a bit. Same kind of thing, and I'm going to show you in another way here. This is Patriot Underground's channel. Okay, so 74K views, right? So in one of his videos, this is about 20 days ago. We had one. Well, let's go over here. Let's do it this way. So this was done with Mike King. Okay, from a global perspective, who the flock is Mike King, right? We got 71,000 views. He and I did a 3-hour kind of response there. We were talking back and forth, and there was 101,000, 108,000 views. And I just go, this is what's making them literally crazy, because they don't understand how, with zero advertisement budget, with zero, knowledge of who these people are. We've got channels like this that in 5 days got 71,000 views. And
That was a real popular show that we did, that roundtable.
right,
loved it, yeah.
which is, which is wild because it doesn't have any one of these well-known people on here. I mean, John Bolton got 1.4 million views because of what he was talking about, because they said Trump in there. And yet one of the things that we've been finding here, or we've been hearing about very recently, is that the mainstream media on an average basis during the week get anywhere from 50 to 75,000 views, and on a weekend maybe 150, and yet I could show you on something, like my channel. We know, I mean, our friend Dave with News Treason kind of did some math on my channel and realized how much massive amounts of collapsing on YouTube that they're doing with me. And yet when I do something with Elijah List that I did just the other day, it can get 150, 250,000 views. And I go, who am I compared to, all these other, mainstream media people? So they're freaking out because they don't understand how we can actually accomplish that with zero budget, where they have tens of millions of dollars per month to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's exactly the reason, is that people can sense, and this has been something that's happened over a long period of time. It's not like it's brand new, but more and more people can identify, and this is really what the Great Awakening is all about. They don't want prepackaged, curated information. They recognize that as being false. They recognize it as being fake news. And we can credit Trump with that, because during his first administration, he was the one who pretty much popularized that term, talking about fake news and pointing that out. And indeed, that's had a ripple effect. I mean, there are accounts like Benny Johnson, some of the bigger accounts.
Oh, yeah.
They dwarf the amount of views that mainstream media gets. CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, all the NBC, all of them.
Joe and Tucker. I mean, Joe Rogan and Tucker just blow them out of the water. I mean, 70 million without even trying with that.
Right. And these are household names. These are people who are famous. And what we're talking about, we have a significant amount of viewership. And certainly we're not household names. We're not famous, but we're putting out the truth. People can instinctively understand that. They can sense it. And they love that. They love unscripted dialogue, knowing full well that nobody's here, at least certainly not myself, and I know not you, Dr. Scott, nobody's here saying we have all the answers. But what we're doing is providing an honest analysis, and that is what people want more and more. Once you recognize, and I'm sure you can remember when you first got red-pilled, we all had that experience when you kind of have that aha moment and you go, holy crap, I've been lied to by the mainstream media. I've been ingesting all of this fake news, and it's shaped my worldview. And it turns out that it's all BS. And
Right.
That's exactly what this is intended to do. And clearly we can see the fruit starting to, it's bearing fruit, and it has been for a very long time now. So,
well, I want to bring this back up to the screen because it's just so powerful because of what we were just saying. One of the key elements that are in here, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, and you have been, is that, we have this issue of, we will be initiating the EBS, and it's basically over fake news. So you talked about that. And why do we need to do that? Why do we need to override the EBS because of the fake news? What's the deal over that? I mean, so even if it is with a Q drop, or the capability for them to have controlled the news, why do they need to kind of cover over the top of it? I mean, people would be looking at you going, why, if they have control, why do they have to take control of it already?
Well, I think that it's all part of the movie. And I think that at any point in time, the white hats could initiate the emergency broadcast. They could have done it probably a couple of years ago,
Sure.
even longer. But that's really not what this operation is all about. You have to interpret it, at least from my perspective, as a movie for the normies out there. And the emergency broadcast has a number of different implications to it. And you and I have discussed this on previous shows, but the reality of the matter is that once they really drop the hammer and they put out this horrific disclosure, whether it's pertaining to Epstein, whether it's pertaining to COVID, certainly we could lump in the election fraud as well. But I think when you're talking about the really deep, dark stuff, and I've believed this for a long time, you can't just put it out there and expect that the world isn't going to come to a standstill. There has to be this dramatic moment where everything else stops and everybody is forced to pay attention to what's going on. So that's, I think, the reason for it. The EBS is necessary in order to transition from the old system, and you know a lot about this, obviously, from a financial standpoint, to unplug the old system and to plug in the new one. But at the same time, it also serves the purpose of bringing the world to a standstill so that everybody understands the severity of what's going on. Now, I happen to believe, and this is kind of going back to where we're talking about the hybrid aspect of the movie, that there are a lot of individuals who have already been taken off the chessboard. That's the reason we've been seeing people in masks for a very long time now. But we still have upwards of 500,000 sealed indictments that have to be, these mass arrests have to happen. And so that's another key element of it. You don't want the world to just be going about its business, obviously, when you're putting out this disclosure, but at the same time, you got the military on the streets conducting all of these mass arrests. There has to be a reason, a rationale for everybody to basically go home, to stay home, to stay out of the military's way. And I think that is 100% going to happen. The degree to which it's going to be quote unquote staged versus real and organic, that's up to everybody out there to decide. But we're talking primarily about the optics that are being presented to the public. And there are a number of different things that could prompt the EBS that I think are still on the table. We just had Elon come out not too long ago, I think just yesterday, and he's been doing this all over and over and over, talking about we're headed toward bankruptcy. Even with all the Doge audits and with all the talk about, going into Fort Knox and finding out if the gold is there, and all of these things are great, but we're still headed off a financial cliff. So that's one aspect. Then, of course, there's the mass deportations, which we're expecting are going to ramp up. And I think in Drop 34, that has always been my understanding about the meaning of the riots. Public riots will ensue to prevent the capture of senior level officials. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's obviously still very much on the table. And then you've also got the whole World War III scare event, which something that for a while, to be honest with you, I thought that this was going to take place. I thought to myself, well, there's no way, or it doesn't really seem logical to me that they would have a World War III scare event with Trump optically in office. You would want to do that while fake Biden was in office to create the narrative that he was the one who led us into this, to being on the precipice of World War III. However, we're starting to see more and more indications that that's still on the table.
But let's kind of clue you in with some of the conversations, and my wife and I even kind of get on both sides of this table in this one too. Like, will it be a real scare event, a real event of nuclear capability? What that would mean is we've allowed the opposite military, the cabal, to be able to have enough power, or is it on the other hand? No, it's more of what I like to call fake false flag. And it was, fake. And then we go, oh, by the way, here's what here's what we're really doing here? Or would you say some hybrid in there? Or how would you kind of go along with that?
I 100% believe that it's going to be a fake false flag, as you put it. The White Hats had to make sure that those types of capabilities, those weapons, nukes, etc. Now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about directed energy weapons and tectonic weapons as well, but the nuclear threat had to be eliminated before they could move forward with other aspects of their plan, knowing that the deep state had these nukes tucked away for a rainy day, shall we say. I don't think that there's any way that we would have seen the operation progress the way it has had those weapons not already been neutralized.
Right.
So I don't think that there's a chance that we're going to be looking at a scenario where it's a real World War III scare event. And there's also many indications in the drops themselves and also in all the comms that we've seen that Russia and China are working with Trump. And I don't remember what drop it is. I could maybe try to pull it up, but there was one where it talked about, what if, in the way that Q asked these, sort of Socratic method, rhetorical type questions, what if Russia and China were working with POTUS to bring an end to the New World Order? And when you think about the big players that would actually have to be opposed to one another kinetically in order to make that threat come to fruition, you're talking about the U.S., Russia, and China. And pretty much every other nation on earth takes their lead from one of those three nations. So my belief has always been that President Xi and President Putin covertly have been working with the White Hats this entire time to prevent this World War III scenario from playing out, because this was the deep state's plan. They wanted to spark World War III, and this was written about by Albert Pike. Folks can go back and do their research. Right. That they were supposed to kick off World War III in the Middle East, and it was going to essentially end in mutually assured destruction, as the cabal sat back on the sidelines, went underground, and Russia, China, U.S. just started nuking each other and destroying the world. That was their end game, or at least an aspect of their end game. So,
and that's why they made all those post-apocalyptic movies and pushed them, and the zombie craze and all this other stuff, because that's what they wanted. I mean, that is the type of society they wanted. That the rats would be sitting around and chewing each other up, and yet they'd be stuck underground with relative ease in that way.
Exactly. So that was their end game. So I personally don't believe that whatever plays out on that front is going to be organic, like an actual real situation. It's going to look real. And that's what so many folks said. I guess that's the reason we're having this conversation in part right now, is because everything that appears to be happening right now looks very real.
Right.
And optics don't really matter all that much if they don't look real. So yeah, I think that on that question, yes, absolutely. It would be a simulation. And I think that's what the White Hats have been doing this entire time. Is the way I describe it is, if you've got the deep state plan over here and the White Hat plan over here, and it's kind of like a parallel construction where because you want to show the people, like Hugh said, you can't tell them, you have to show them. So what's the best way to do that? Well, you take care of all of the big players, you eliminate all of the major threats covertly behind the scenes, you take control of the illusion-making machine that the deep state used on us, and then you create your plan, but it has to look in a lot of ways very similar to what the deep state had in store for us, because that's the only way to show people, to bring people to the precipice. And that's what I think that is going on right now with this situation as far as the World War III scare event, that they're trying to show us and bring us to that precipice moment so that people actually realize, holy crap, this is how close we came to destruction. And then at the end of it all, there's going to be this massive reveal, a la the sum of all fears, which was mentioned numerous times And the whole premise of that movie essentially was there's like, a missing nuke, and the deep state more or less, sets it off inside of a stadium to try to spark nuclear war between Russia and the U.S. Did Q just put that in there just for no reason? I don't think so.
Too random. Yeah, it's not. It's so random, but yet it's been shown over again in that. I can't remember the opera, but it's Dulce something.
Nessun Dorma.
Yeah, Nessun Dorma, and
Yeah.
it was played over and over again. So
over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the sum of all fears is referenced, I think, at least about 10 times.
Oh, sure.
So there's a lot of comms pointing us in this direction. And now we've got Iran. Trump is basically saying time's running out with Iran. We're not going to allow them to get a nuke. And Iran came back and said, well, we're not going to accept any demands or take our cue from the United States. So there's that tension brewing. And then, of course, we've also got the whole situation with Ukraine and the U.S. now basically saying Trump is considering pretty much removing the United States from NATO, and the whole situation with Zelensky. I think there's a lot of comms that are pointing in that direction. And there are a lot of reasons to believe that this could represent the climactic end of the movie. Or let's just say, the climax is like the beginning of the end where everything starts to get unraveled.
Right.
So I think that that's still very much on the table. I had put it on the back burner, like I said, but it does appear that there's a strong possibility that could still play out. We don't know. See, that's the thing. I don't have the script. You don't have the script. So we have to some degree, engage in some speculation, I think, for the sake of our audience, to give folks a sense of our analysis about where things are going. But the reality is, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the 3 pillars of Q, if we're talking about it, then most likely, and this is really evidenced by the history of this operation, the way it's unfolded, to my knowledge, nobody has been able to accurately predict how the sequence of events was going to play out. And I think was done deliberately. It doesn't mean that they're not going to play out. It just means that they're not going to play out the way that we anticipate or in the timeline that we're expecting to.
Well, and that to that point as well, I think it was a dynamic script. I think there have been times where they were ready and then they pulled back, or ready, they pulled back. Something occurred and they pulled back. And back to this kind of idea too. So I know that personally, when I look at the financial situation, I'm like, we are at a critical level, and a few people are starting to say we are deep in a potential Great Depression, far beyond what is out there if we don't fix this. But yet the military would they would want to go on until every single one of them are taken care of, and they smashed all the rats all the way through, and so there's always a tension between those two camps with that. But why haven't we seen it yet? Is there some overriding situation between them that says no, we have to do it? Why haven't we gone there?
Well, there's different theories. It's interesting that you brought that up pertaining to the fluidity of this operation. There are a lot of folks out there who believe that it's very much a dynamic scenario where it's like they make a move, we make a move. They make a move, we make a move. And I think that was very true in the beginning.
Right.
But post January 6th, 2021, I think that was the moment, quite frankly, where we actually saw the White Hats taking control kinetically of Washington, D.C. But it was just, it was packaged in such a way where most people just interpreted that of, oh, okay, well, they're calling in the military because they want to make sure that there's, they want to prevent terrorist attacks. They want to make sure everybody's safe and all that. That's the way that it was presented to the public.
Right.
Well, we've never, ever seen anything like that. I mean, you go back to January 6th or, and in the inauguration, which followed with, what was it, like 30,000 plus troops in Washington, D.C. And ever since then, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that most of DC has basically been shut down.
Yeah, it's a ghost town all the way through and through.
Right. I mean, there's, of course, there's still cars, there's still people there, and so forth. But when you look at the, the buildings, the Federal Reserve, on and on and on, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that was the moment where the White Hats actually took control. And from that point on, quite frankly, I don't believe that it's really been a fluid situation in the same way, because I think that's when they took control. And that's when the movie aspect really kicked into high gear. I'm not saying it didn't exist before, but once they took full control, I don't really think there was much of a chess game going on in the same way as against the deep state. That's not to suggest that, like I referred to a little while ago when I was talking about the sealed indictments, that's not to suggest that every single minion of the deep state has been swept up at this point. No. But all of the big ones, all of the basically their entire leadership structure, yes, I believe they're under white hat control. So why is it not happened yet? Well, I think it's a multifaceted question. But if this operation is really about gradually raising the consciousness of the public about what exactly the deep state was up to and how horrific their crimes were, and it has to be incrementally done. And then on top of that, it has to appear to them, to all the normies out there, that this is organic, like that they're not actually being manipulated. They're not being pushed in a certain direction. I think that's why the White Hats never wanted to just, drop the hammer very overtly and just come out and dump all this disclosure out and essentially engage in a hot coup.
You mean like on the media kind of thing? Just finally just show up. All the COVID or well, more of the child trafficking kind of stuff, right?
Well, they want to show people, and this is, I think, what Q was talking about when he said you have to show people,
right?
And that's why we're watching a show, not because it's not just about the disclosure of what they did, but it's also revealing to the public gradually how they were able to do it, and not forcing a red pill down people's throat, because they want people to willingly take the red pill, but they also don't want them to know that they're being manipulated into taking that red pill. It has to appear to be an organic process, because the end game is unity. They want, that's why we always use that phrase, where we go one, we go all. They want America to be unified, and indeed the world after that, but they want unity. And the only way to do that is to create the optics that they're creating and gradually play out all of these scenes where they're in complete control. They can control exactly how it's going to, they've eliminated those threats like we talked about, so that they can focus on bringing people up to speed. And I think that's exactly the reason that it's taken so long. It can't be perceived. I mean, think about it. If you know that somebody is trying to manipulate you,
oh yeah,
what's your reaction to that? Your reaction is going to
back
like this.
Right.
And you're going to put up those walls. You're not going to accept it as the truth. You might even get violent over it. But if you want to unify people, you have to go in a very different direction. And the White Hats admitted it in the drops. We were prepared to do the unthinkable, meaning a hot coup, if Trump actually hadn't won in 2016. They didn't want to go down that road, because they knew that if they did, and all of a sudden we just saw tanks on the streets and people had no clue what was going on, that would be interpreted as more or less as a hostile takeover, a belligerent takeover of the government, and it would have resulted in violence. And bare minimum, it would have created a divide that would last decades. That's not what they wanted. So they had to stop the direction of the deep state was leading us. They knew exactly what Hillary was planning on doing, but at the same time, they wanted to create enough space in order for people to gradually understand everything that you and I understand and that your audience understands. And that's something that I think that gets lost a lot of time when we have these discussions, is that people don't fully appreciate the necessity of that. Because every single time you look throughout history, when there's been some sort of a military coup, or there's been some sort of a civil war, this major divide that ripped apart the country, it takes, like I said, it takes decades to piece that back together. And I think in this country, especially, that might have been a path that we never came back from. We might have been able to prevent all of the horrific things that were in store for us, but you would have had probably 60, 70% of the country violently opposed to what was happening.
Right.
And that's
not even know why they were violently opposed to it at times.
Well, I mean, you also had the deep state at full power as well. So they would have been able to very easily manipulate that situation. That was also a part of their end game too. They didn't want just world war. They also wanted to generate a civil war inside of this country so that we would tear ourselves apart. That's always been their divide and conquer strategy. So any manifestation of that, they would have been very happy with. And that's what we've been spared because of this operation. And people get really pissed off about it. And look, I understand the frustration. And anybody who listens to my show and especially over a long period of time will know that I voice that frustration. I talk about it honestly when I'm having, when I'm going through these valleys and I'm starting to question things, because I don't think it serves any good purpose to ignore the elephant in the room. What we should be talking about is what this whole experience is doing to all of us emotionally, spiritually, cognitively. Right. And there are times along the way where it's gotten really dark. And I understand the frustration. I've said, and I know you know this, that there is no victory in this war without disclosure and justice.
Yeah.
1,000. I mean, like I've said, that's a hill I'll die on.
Yep.
I mean, it absolutely has to happen. So I completely sympathize and understand the frustration. I understand the cynicism. I understand why people are raising these questions that we're talking about right now. And then the other element of it is there's a whole bunch of controlled opposition, I believe, that's still out there.
Right.
That's trying to infuse doubt, that's trying to create division. And that's why I believe it's a hybrid situation. Yes, most of the leadership of the cabal, they've been eliminated, but that doesn't mean that their mid-level minions aren't still out there doing what they do. And we see evidence of it every single day. Some of that, you could make the argument that the white hats are simulating that controlled opposition. I mean, you could debate that stuff all day, but the reality is that we're not getting one simple, straightforward narrative, and people are, they're just exhausted. They're emotionally exhausted. They're mentally exhausted. They feel spiritually like, oh my gosh, when is this going to happen? That sense of frustration. So I get it. I totally get it. But the flip side of that coin is, think about where we're at right now. I mean, put aside the frustration, the anger, and all of it for a moment, and imagine where we would be if the deep state was able to carry out their agenda.
This is
conversation.
When America falls, the whole world falls. You can't stop that. And I actually had I had an employee that was a very long time employee. I would always say she was kind of a centrist. She had a left leaning on some things, but other parts she was very centrist in viewpoint, right? And we could have agreements on areas. And in the last year or so, I started to see, more and more walk back into, the left, kind of mentality. And I know that she had voted for Biden the last two elections, or Kamala Biden, whatever it is, the hybrid of that. And so she gives her notice back in December. And and we'd been together for a long time, just a very key employee with that. Mm-hmm. And Kathleen and I were sitting down, we were talking, and I said, I know you. She goes, I just don't feel like I could carry forward the soul of the company, and I really want to go, work for a place where I'm just not known and I can just kind of fade in the background. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Just kind of like, it's a very crazy left wing, kind of. Now, I'm not talking about, blue hair kind of response, but more of a sheepish response. I just want to be with the sheep and go with the flow and not have anything that rocks my boat. And I said to her this.
That's
He said, Kathleen, listen, we live in Oklahoma. We should be caring, you and I, on maybe on either side of the aisle, if you want to say it that way, should be going, you know what? I care about things that are in my city, fixing what's happening in my city. And she was like, she looked at me kind of funny. And I said, it's those idiots in DC who are really our enemy. And she just looked at me kind of funny, and she kind of realized, wow, maybe I'm thinking that's wrong. Now she left, and she's going to do her own thing. But I think that's where a lot of people are, is there's, they have an apathy with all of that stuff, but they're sheep, with that too.
Yeah.
So, in that circumstance, would you say, is there a potential reason why we haven't seen those JFK files and the Epstein files, and Pam Bondi is getting, just castigated over that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a reason for it. First, I mean, there are many, but when you're operating on the premise that this is a movie, okay?
Do you want to bring that up on the screen that you have there?
Oh, well, that actually, yeah, if you want to bring that up, I brought that up just to amplify the point that you were making of why is this taking so, the question, why is this taking so long? And the individual that you were just discussing. This is drop 4641. The swamp runs deep. And this is what I've been talking about. You can't tell the people the truth. You have to show them. But this is the key part. Only then, at the precipice, will people find the will to change, to participate. So, the person that you were just talking about, I think is representative of pretty much all the normies out there.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is that even us, even the Anons, it's not like we wanted to know these things. It's not like this was a horrific experience. Waking up is a difficult process, and that's putting it mildly. So why haven't we seen the Epstein files? Why haven't these things happened? Well, you have to, first of all, you have to create that sense of drama. Okay. Every movie needs to have controversy, drama, some element of it that's going to draw people's attention in. So why didn't they just come out right away? I mean, Pam Bondi, obviously, with the whole phase 1 thing, what was the purpose of that? Well, I would argue that the purpose of that was to create that controversy, because controversy forces discussions. It forces people to pay attention.
Right.
If they just came right out with it, then it would just, it would just be, first of all, I think other things have to happen first. And this is kind of part of where I was going to go with this question. But
okay,
what do the Epstein files and JFK have in common? Well, if you've been doing research, you probably know, and I don't mean you, I'm just talking to the general audience out there, that we're talking about the exposure of the Zionist regime in Israel. Okay? There's no way that you can really expose the Epstein story without exposing Mossad and without exposing Israel.
right.
Likewise, you can't really tell the full story about JFK, because the real reason that he was assassinated, there were many reasons they wanted to get rid of him. But right at the very top of that list is David Ben-Gurion took exception to the idea that JFK was trying to stand in the way of Israel getting nuclear weapons. And what did Q tell us? Israel will be saved for last. Now, does that mean that we're going to have to wait like years more for this to play out? I certainly hope not. I don't believe that it will. Right. But I think they're doing multiple things here. They're creating the drama so that more and more people are actually paying attention to it. They dangle the carrot out there, and then they pull it away, and then they dangle it out there and they pull it away, and everybody gets frustrated and angry. And then the next thing you know, It's everywhere. It's all over social media. It's all over mainstream media. They're talking
Right.
about this, the Epstein files, the Epstein files, the Epstein files. And how do you get the attention? How do you reverse the brainwashing? You have
Mm.
to use the same tactics that caused the brainwashing to begin with. And they understand, the white hats understand that very well. And this is something I don't think is fully appreciated by our community, is that we look at it and we say to ourselves, well, this is evil and it needs to be exposed, and
Right.
throw the cards out there, let the chips fall where they may. Okay. But that's not the way that we got into this whole mess to begin with. This was a very gradual process over many, many decades that led people to believing that Israel was our greatest ally. And you got to remember as well that, and by the way, I always say this, but just to make sure there's no confusion, I'm not talking about all Jews.
Yeah, really. That's
Not,
a good point. We're not talking about the people of
no,
Israel, because we could say the same thing about every single nation. It's the top
the
layer
top
of
level,
the
exactly.
nasties,
In the
right?
same way that when we talk about the deep state here in the United States, we're not talking about the American people,
No,
right? It's the same basic thing, but that's part of the deep state's whole game plan is everything. The minute you mention Israel or anything along those lines, they hit you with the anti-Semitism. They did the
right.
same thing with racism and all of these other labels, which I think are becoming less and less effective. But at the same time, we have to remember that there is a massive, massive portion of the American population that has been gaslit into believing that Israel is our greatest ally, just on a political level. But then it's much deeper because it goes into the Schofield Bible and Zionism, and more or less that uh, Trump's a vast majority, I would say, of Trump's base is evangelical Zionist Christian. So it's a very, very delicate topic, especially when it goes into the religious category, because this is something that people feel. I mean, it's like their spiritual foundation is built upon this idea of always supporting Israel, and that being the chosen nation and the chosen people, and on and on and on. Well, what happens if you've got to expose to the population that this has always been a deep state construct? It's been a lie, right? Not about the Jewish people, but about the Zionists, who are really the Khazarian mafia. How do you expose that to people? Well, you have to do it very delicately and gradually. And Epstein and JFK, these are tied into that. So the way I look at it is there are still a number of things that need to play out before we actually get to exposing Israel. Q made it very clear. We're saving Israel for last. So what I think is going to happen with the Epstein files, my best guess anyway, is that they're going to, in the same way that they've been doing now for years, is that they're going to be trickling out information. The first phase was pretty much a nothing burger, right? It didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know.
Right. With a
Now,
whole bunch of like redacted pages. You're like, come on.
right, right. And I think, and now, of course, Pam Bondi, of course, she's been the subject of the ire,
Beat her up a lot, right?
right, of the American people, and I
Mm.
understand it, but I think it's all by design. See,
Hmm.
some people would look at it and say, well, Pam Bondi, she's deliberately hiding the truth, and she's kind of playing the role of gatekeeper. Look, listen, it could be a number of different things. Could it be that Pam Bondi is playing a role right now? Absolutely. Is it possible that she was? Let's just say she's not. She's not good. Okay.
Right.
Is it possible that she's been put under submission and given this role to play of kind of playing the gatekeeper who's keeping this away from the American people? It's possible. It's also possible that she's 100% good, and she's also playing this role for the White Hats, but in a way to demonstrate to the American people and indeed to the world how the elite system, how the deep state insulates itself. And this is
Right.
what I was talking about before. It's not just about exposing all of the evil, but it's also about educating the people in terms of how this evil is gate kept, how it's prevented from actually reaching the public. And I think that is the dominant conversation right now. Everybody's, all over X, all over social media, even on mainstream media, people are asking that question over and over and over again. Why are we not getting the files? Elon Musk went on Joe Rogan and they were talking about it just the other day. And, we were talking about the reach of those individuals. Think about that for a moment. I don't think you could name two people on the planet who have a bigger reach than Elon Musk and Joe Rogan. So if they're having a dialogue, they're having a back and forth, and they're talking about Epstein and, the role of the Southern District of New York and the FBI and the three-letter agencies and preventing this information from coming out and the redacted files, what does that do? Again, it prompts a conversation. It prompts a worldwide, a national, and indeed a worldwide conversation. It gets people to focus on the issue. And I think that that's ultimately what we're going to see. We're going to continually see more information come out, but it's not going to come out in one big flood. And I think eventually we're going to get to the point where all of it is exposed. And there's actually a drop that I highlighted on a recent show that talks about Epstein. I can go ahead and pull that up here.
Sure.
So this one is, oh wait, I got to hit the present button here.
Yep.
So this drop right here is $37.99. And this is back in January of 2020. You didn't think we highlighted Epstein for no reason, did you? Those who were protected, who were once protected, are no longer. Timing is everything. The hunters become prey. And then, and there are other drops as well that talk directly about the whole process of disclosure and that everything is going to be on the timeline of the White Hats. Now, we can't answer definitively. If we knew the answers to, well, why is it taking so long? Definitively, then I don't think, I don't really think we'd even really be having this conversation, right? We have to speculate to some degree, but when you look at this from the perspective of gradually bringing people up to speed and having it be an organic or appear to be an organic process of awakening for all the normies out there to prepare them for the enormity of what is coming, it makes a lot of sense. And Epstein is like, it's like the bottom of the rabbit hole right there. I mean, that's that thread. Once you pull it, everything starts to fall apart. Everything gets exposed, including Israel, which is why I believe that we're going to see that process. It's going to take a little while. And I hate to say it, but because I myself got swept up in the emotion and the expectation when it was first announced, when she came out on Jesse Waters and Pam Bondi said, I've got the Epstein files on my desk and, breaking news tomorrow, you guys are going to get the Epstein files. I took the bait on that because I understand the significance of what that represents.
Right.
And just the other night, I was talking about this as well. And I said that with Joe and Scott from the Truth Stream, great guys, we were having this conversation. And I said, it's amazing because everything that's happened so far since Trump was inaugurated for his third term has been incredible, right? We've seen an enormous amount of winning take place, right? But hypothetically, all of the actions that Trump has taken, all of the executive orders and all of the, the defunding, the exposure of all the Doge exposure, et cetera, theoretically or hypothetically, that could be undone by a future administration.
Right.
But the one thing that cannot be undone is the revelations of the Epstein files, the true disclosure. Once that drops, there's no going back. And that's why everybody is so focused on this, because they recognize that. They recognize that once that truth comes out and it changes human consciousness, there's never going to be any going back to that.
Well, and I agree with you there because, I personally believed the moment those things drop, we are seconds away from an EBS because it will erupt, in natures that we can't do because, even when the possibility of some of those things were dropping, we had Bill Clinton going, that wasn't me kind of statements. And I think it is going to really mess with, and obviously they want to show how Trump flew a couple times on the plane. I'm like, do you want to look at the dates of when that happened? And do you also want to look at down in Florida when he kicked Epstein out of the Trump hotels? And he also, when there's a huge detective at that time frame when they were doing that first major push where they're going to put him in prison, even though he got off, on weekends, kind of crazy stuff. And they were showing how Trump, and the detective said, Trump is the only one who sat down and answered all of our questions so that we could figure out, but everyone else would not meet with us whatsoever. That tells you who's innocent and who's guilty in there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I look at it from an even broader perspective. Going back to some of the things I was talking about earlier about 2016 and doing the unthinkable and all that sort of thing. Go back to 2015, before Trump came down the escalator and before this whole journey started. Where were we at in terms of consciousness as a nation? I mean, how many people had any clue about all of the things that were going to be revealed by Q?
The 3 or 4% kind of thing, less.
Yeah, like 3 or 4%, such a small number that it's negligible. Like if you're the deep state, you don't even care. So 3 to 4%, even 5% of the people know what we're up to. Doesn't matter, right? Why would they? So if Trump were actually compromised and Trump was actually not a good guy and he was really playing for their side,
right?
Why in God's name would you bring him onto the scene when they had us exactly where they wanted us? I mean, they had us over a barrel. All they had to do was get Hillary in there.
Yeah.
And without Trump coming along, there's no doubt that she would have won. So then if you're the deep state, why would you take like a 12-year detour in order to play out your end game at a time when information, because of the internet, is so readily available, and people just simply because of that have much more of an ability to uncover the truth, to communicate with each other, et cetera, et cetera. Why would you have Trump come onto the scene to begin with? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And then, of course, you look at pretty much everything that Trump has done since day one of his first term, or even before when he came down that escalator. Everything that he's done has been antithetical to their agenda. He still puts up the optics of, supporting Israel and all of that stuff. And I do believe that there's a very specific reason for that, because the movie still has to play out and it has to look organic and real. But everything that Trump has done has been counter to what the deep state wanted. So, when you get into these conversations about, he was on a plane with Epstein. Look, he never went to the island, like you said, fully cooperated, and they've tried to make this connection with Trump, but talk about a nothing burger. There's nothing there. He did kick Jeffrey Epstein out. He did mention him multiple different times, talking about he's kind of got a problem with younger women, and
he even said that in 2015. One of a major interview, he was talking when all of us were kind of looking at him. We didn't know what was going on, and we knew that he was thinking about it. Later on, we figured that out. But he said, "Yeah, that's a real sick boy." And like, okay. Where no one else came in, and no one else was on that side at all. They just didn't want to say anything.
Right. I think that what Trump and the White Hats want to do is they want the perception that Israel is kind of like this protected class, if you will. And you're even seeing, like, RFK recently came out and he wrote this whole piece about, anti-Semitism, and Pam Bondi just opened up an investigation into anti-Semitism on college campuses, and people are going, what the hell is going on here? Like, we've got all of these, we're talking about the Epstein files, we're talking about crimes against humanity, we're talking about pedophilia, et cetera, et cetera. And you're talking about opening up investigations into anti-Semitism. I think that those are the optics that they want right now, in order to ultimately reveal to the people that indeed in America, in a lot of ways, before the White Hats were able to take over, was an occupied nation.
Right.
And I think that that's exactly the whole purpose of it. And not to mention the fact, kind of what we were alluding to before, I think there's also the objective of making sure that they they have to be very careful how they expose Israel,
Right.
because they don't what they don't want, obviously, is people
Is
getting angry and
destroying.
going out
Yeah.
against all Jews.
Right.
So I think that's also a part of the puzzle as well.
Well, and I mean, it's funny because I mean, there's something. I mean, listen, my wife and I were talking about this the other day, and she was asking how many hours I work, and I'm like, well, most people who know anything about me, I get up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm I'll go until like 10 o'clock at night, and it's a lot of times I'm not sleeping during the night, with that too. The other thing that I kind of say is that, I will take breaks throughout the day. And when I take a break, I will go watch something. And when I'm watching something, whether it's, it's a streaming video, I'm not really looking, watching other people's videos, on YouTube or Rumble necessarily. What I'm trying to do is find out the curiosities. And so you'll see, movies or TV shows on the CIA or other kinds of areas, and they will tell you the truth. I mean, they will bring out their, I mean, they will talk about the Q movement. I'm going, why would you even say anything about that? It's because they're dropping they're dropping the hint with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And let me go ahead and highlight this drop as well, because I think this is also relevant. This is 2816. And this one's a bit longer, but let's go and hit some of the key aspects of this, considering where we're at right now in terms of the Epstein files, the Southern District of New York, etc. So the declassification of all requested documents and more will occur.
Wait, when was that? Can you air up and just tell me when that? Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
2019. Yes,
Wow, wow.
2019. And there are others. I mean, I could probably do this all day long, but trying to focus on some of the really important ones. And there's another one that I'll talk about in just a moment, right? This is not a game. And this gets it right into the heart of kind of what we're talking about here. Do not let personal emotions and desires do it now. What's taking so long now?
Wow.
Don't let that take over. Logical thinking and strategy should always be applied. Game theory. And that's a whole separate discussion there as well. But I think that's also how the movie, the script is playing out in alignment with game theory. We all want to see equal justice under the law, new threats, investigations by, oh, look at that.
Oh my gosh,
Southern
dude.
District of New York. In an effort to delay and prevent release will fail. Transparency is the only way forward. Define the following: treason, sedition, subversion, conspiracy to commit, ... Do you understand and fully appreciate the gravity of the situation? Do you understand and fully appreciate what POTUS endures each and every day? He loves this country. He loves you. We must stand together in this fight. There is evil in this world. There is darkness in this world. There are those in power who wish to control and enslave you, to keep you sedated, to keep you unaware, to keep you blind. This will be on our timetable, and we will deliver. Transparency and prosecution. Okay, that means arrests. There is simply no other way. So that, I think, kind of gets right down to the heart of the matter. And quite honestly, I think what most of this really boils down to for folks out there is and I've said this, and I don't mean this in a way to kind of like, to put myself or anybody else who follows Q up on a pedestal. But if you haven't actually gone and looked at the drops, I mean, I would recommend for everybody out there to just read them. Go back and read them from start to finish. But if you don't understand and you haven't done the research into Q, you don't have any basis to understand what's happening right now. You're going to interpret it as all being organically playing out, and none of it's going to make any sense. Like if you look at it from the lens of the white hats being in control and they're scripting this out, and Q didn't just say that this is a movie. He said this is a scripted movie. So if you understand it from that perspective, it makes a lot more sense. It's not going to answer every single question that we have, but
No.
it enables you to put things into perspective. And now all of a sudden you're starting to see, isn't it really interesting? I'll pull this up on, this was a post that it was Dr. Russell McGregor is a really good account to follow on X. The cast of characters, Dr. Scott, is coming back into play. We referenced Drop 34 at the beginning of the show, right? Oh, this actually isn't the one that I was thinking of, but you know what?
That's an excellent one though too. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do this one, right? This is a explain to me for anybody out there who doesn't really believe Q or thinks it's all a psyop or whatever. Why is it that Hillary Clinton changed her account picture on X on an exact
something in the Q movement? I mean,
think about that.
Yeah.
Why would she, if you're Hillary Clinton, okay, first let's just say for hypothetically that Hillary was still alive, okay?
Right.
Let's just say she was still alive. You really don't think that Hillary knows or would know that this exact same picture, that, by the way, has a lot of, let's just say, connotations about pedophilia, about Hades specifically? Knowing, I mean, do you really think that Hillary Clinton didn't know that this picture was in the Q drops? And why, how is it possible? How can you explain that? Why she would change her picture to a Q drop, first of all, but on an exact 6-year delta?
Right.
Did that happen by accident? I just see, this is the type of stuff that we were talking about in the beginning. You can write off a coincidence here or there. But when you see something like this, you have to ask yourself these very important critical thinking type questions. All right? This is a picture that literally is, as he put it, this is an exact 6-year delta and in context with the upcoming pedo disclosures.
Mm. Mm.
So obviously somebody is controlling her Twitter account, her X account. All right. But what I was, let me see if I can find the other one that I wanted to highlight too, because this is another really great example about how the cast of characters from the early Q drops is all of a sudden coming back into the news.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure. Yeah, I can imagine.
Oh goodness, I probably should have pre-prepared this thing here. Oh yeah, here we go. And this was pointed out. This is a post by our mutual friends over at News Treason, Dave and Mark. John Podesta, back in the news. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, connected to a slush fund.
Yeah, and that one confused me for a long time. I was like, Podesta, and the farther we got away, from the Bill Clinton, time frame, I'm like, Podesta. And then of course you had to show up right during the Doge kind of investigations. And you're like,
That's right. That's right. And who was mentioned specifically in Drop 34? John Podesta.
Right.
And so there are a number of these examples just go on and on and on. They're also bringing Andrew Cuomo back into the narrative.
Right.
Right. They're bringing the cast of characters back. Now, none of us have the roadmap. We don't know exactly the sequence or how they're all going to play it out. But don't you think it's awfully strange? Those two examples right there, like all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're getting news about John Podesta in the news in the New York Post. I mean, this is an individual who was just hardcore evil.
Right.
Alongside Hillary. That's why they were so close. Hillary, Huma Abedin. I mean, anybody that was in her direct orbit, her little sphere there, you're talking about true Satanism.
Right.
Okay. So how do you explain all of these things? I guess that's the point. So a lot of the time what people do is they throw shade on the Q operation because, oh, well, these things haven't happened the way that they said they would. Or people, I've seen some ridiculous posts out there like, well, Q hasn't been right about anything. Are you kidding me?
I'm like,
have you even read the Q drops? Have you done any research whatsoever?
Right.
if you have, then there's no possible way that you could make that statement. Sure, the timestamps and the dates and the things like that. Yeah, I guess you could classify that, like we were talking about, as disinformation, and because you're not going to reveal exactly how the plan is going to play out. Of course not.
Yeah, you wouldn't. You wouldn't at all of any type. But one of the things that always, as we kind of wrap up here, I'll just say this point that, what's bothered me for a very long time is not one single media source person has ever truly investigated, the Q stuff
Of
and
course not.
just said, wait, that stuff is eerie, because it really is eerie in what it's saying. And not one single group of any of them have made a real serious investigation on the areas that we've talked about, serious investigation on the Titanic, serious investigation on, the initiation of the Fed and IRS, that serious investigation of any of those things to say, why haven't we talked about it? It's because they're the deletion and we are the addition in essence with it too.
Well, right. And it's speaking, by the way, of things coming back into the news, right? And even the individuals out there, I don't like to mention any names. I don't get into that. But there are some really, really big influencers, podcasters, etc., especially on X. We're talking about accounts that have 1 million plus subscribers, right? Who are coming out and saying, well, this whole Q thing, I mean, yeah, they're throwing a whole bunch of shade on it. But at the same time, they're also talking about the stuff that Q brought to the fore.
I know. Yeah.
They're talking about Pizzagate, which, oh yeah, that's all of a sudden Pizzagate is back in the
Massive.
news.
Right.
All of a sudden that's back into in the narrative. Do we really believe? I mean, you got to ask yourself. You can't answer every single question. But would these narratives be out there and proliferating in the way that they are if the deep state were in control?
Yeah.
That's why
Right.
that question of cui bono is so important. And the other point I wanted to make as well, and this kind of ties into Pizzagate, and it ties into the whole thing that you were talking about there about basically, condemning Q, but never really actually presenting a real rationale or a reason.
Sure.
That's what they do. Is it's kind of like a frame job. You look at what they did with Pizzagate, right? They created the false narrative that Q was saying that Hillary Clinton was running this massive human trafficking ring out of Comet Pizza. So that's what the deep state does, is they create a false narrative. They frame a false narrative. They use their bully pulpit to do this. And then they debunk the false narrative that they've created as a way of trying to debunk the entire story. It's like a
Right.
classic cover up move. That's how they
But they bungle it every time when they do it. I mean,
yes, they do.
I mean, it's easy to pull the narrative apart in a very short fashion, but only the people who really want to investigate will actually do that. Which
Yeah, they
should be the media.
mischaracterize. They mischaracterize what Q has said. And I see all types of stuff like, oh, Q said JFK Jr. is alive. As a matter of fact, Q said the opposite. Q said that this is all about time travel and all of these things. And it's like, and I'm not saying that time travel isn't real, but I don't want to get into that. What I'm saying is that they put out all of these mischaracterizations of whether it be Q or anything else that's true. And then they debunk the mischaracterizations that they created as a way of trying to throw shade on the entire operation, the entire story. And that's, I think, the trap that a lot of people have fallen into. Listen, it's not easy. It's not easy being a Q-tard, as I say,
Really.
because it really you have to understand that it involves a lot of ignorance. There are a lot of people out there,
Right.
even well-meaning people, who don't understand the nature of the operation that we're involved in here because they don't understand. They haven't researched. They haven't done their homework about Q. And I'm not trying to suggest, by the way, that Q and talking about the drops is the only thing that's worth talking about. As a matter of fact, I talk about a lot of different things on my show that aren't necessarily directly related to Q, but the reason that these drops were put out there, I mean, we've been given a roadmap, in essence, that's got a lot of fog of war on it, but more or less to remind us constantly that this is the framework of the operation, that the white hats are in control. Everything that Trump says, everything that his surrogates say, like Dan Scavino and Elon Musk, and I mean, there have been so many individuals like Kash Patel, General Flynn. Uh, the public statements that they make all the time correspond with what Q said. With
Mm-hmm.
drops. So they're continuing to point at it. The first drop was in 2017, and here we are in 2025, and they're still doing it. Now, to me, that's a very strong indicator that this is kind of the core. I mean, if you want to know what's going on, Q said the choice to know will be yours.
Right.
And if you really want to know the nature of the overall operation and to get a better understanding of the questions that you're pondering about, well, why is it taking so long? How come we haven't seen the Epstein files yet? Are we going to have the EBS? Are we going to have a scare event? All of these things. Well, I think, if you go back and you do a little bit of research, you'll have a much better understanding, and you'll be able to temper, I think, a lot of the emotions that go along with this, this ebb and flow that we're experiencing. So,
Right. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, one of the things I want to say is that, I mean, I was making this comment beforehand that I was on Elijah list, and they were, asking, they're asking some question, and we started getting into this about, how I have this cough, and it's been going on for years with that, and kind of, obviously it's a constant irritation with that too, and constant difficulty with that. when your breath is taken away, it's really tough. And so I, people always want to give me all their little cough remedies, right? And I'm like,
that's because they love you. They want to see.
Yeah, and I get it, but I'm like, hold on, please don't do that. I've investigated every single trail I can go down to deal with that. And I mean, I have physicians who are like on call to come up with any new idea I'll come up with that. And yet the reality is there's a spiritual kind of thing that's happening, and it's an attack that keeps coming in. And I just want to share this, is that every time you see Patriot Underground or Dave with excuse me, with News Treason, or anyone that you're following, you just need to be in prayer for these people, because they have their own struggles, and you have no idea the amount of silliness. I just had a guy that texted me while we were speaking, and he goes, "Why are so many people trying to imitate you?" And I'm like, they're just making money off of my face, and someday or another we're going to get this thing killed off. But the EBS, I'll just say this, the EBS is coming. It will happen. You just have to hold on and live your life until that moment comes with that too. So do you have any final thoughts as well?
I would amplify that as well. I mean, yes, first of all, the EBS, like I said in the beginning of the show, it's been a fundamental pillar of Q this entire time. And when you look at it from a logical standpoint, there's really no other way to transition out of the old system and into the new system, while simultaneously bringing the world to a standstill and get everybody to pay attention, to understand exactly where we're at, what we've been going through, what the deep state actually is, and exposing this evil. You can't just expose the evil and expect people to just show up at work the next day,
Right.
and act like everything is okay. There has to be a period of time where everything comes to a halt.
Right.
Why? Because of the severity of what we're talking about. All right. 99% of people, if they knew the full picture, they would never come back. That's the level of evil that we're talking about. Okay. And there's no way to disclose this to the public without having a massive interruption to people's daily lives. I mean, just think about what happened with 9/11. Okay. And as horrific of a day as that was, you remember, I mean, we didn't have an EBS on that day, but the entire
We didn't
world,
need one. The
the
day
event
was
itself
one.
was the EBS, right?
Right.
And for weeks after that, the world wasn't the same. I mean, gradually things got back to some sort of a sense of normalcy, but that was a couple of planes, supposedly.
Right.
But let's just say this: that was the collapsing of the towers, which, as horrific as that day was, it doesn't even it doesn't even really belong in the same conversation of the satanic ritual abuse, the industrial scale human trafficking, the pedophilia, the adrenochrome. I'm not sure if I should be saying things like this on your YouTube, but
Okay.
this is the biggest story in history. Okay, so are we going to have an EBS? I mean, listen, you decide. Q said that we would. I just laid out my rationale. You've heard Dr. Scott many, many times, even just strictly from a financial standpoint, talking about the necessity of switching, basically, unplugging the old system and plugging in the new one in terms of, the QFS and Nasara and Jasara and the new voting system and everything. Like, it has to go offline in order for the new one to come on. But from a logical standpoint, if you believe that we're ultimately going to get disclosure, if you trust Trump, if you trust this operation, to me, it just stands to reason that you have to have that major interruption. And the final thing I'll say is, in terms of the spiritual battle, absolutely right. I talk about a lot of things that I've gone through. There are certain things that I don't get into, but yes, this is the people who decided to put themselves out there and to engage in this process of the Great Awakening. We took a major risk in so doing, in
Oh yeah.
putting ourselves at risk, our families at risk, and even just on a spiritual level, the enemy attacks that those individuals who seek to to drag all of their darkness out into the light, and that manifests itself in multiple different ways. So yes, absolutely, I would underscore that point of please pray for all of us, and pray for humanity. Ultimately, that's what this is all about. This is about the uniting of not just Americans, but the world as a whole. Where we go one, we go all, and nothing can stop what's coming.
Well, that's a good point. So, guys, hey, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you being here tonight. And we will have this on. Today is the 8th, but we will have this on Monday, the 11th, if I'm saying that right, 10th.
The 10th.
10th, yeah. So we will have this on Monday, the 10th, and check it out with that too. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. God bless.